Hi, I'm Rachel. I'm here with my cat Leia, and I'm getting to this video a bit later than I thought I would or hoped I would. At first I was going for my routine Friday reads, but this week, especially the end of the week at work, was really hectic, and I just couldn't get myself up to it. And I've also been having some trouble getting to all the reading I want to. Last weekend kind of threw me off my game a little with my birthday. That's my excuse. But before I get on to the meat of this video, I thought I'd do a little bit of housekeeping, as it were. In my last video, I did a rather amateur turn on my Handycam to show you what's behind the camera. And Steve, from Steve Donahue, noticed my picture of Chiana, a character from Farscape, a sci-fi show that's been off the air for over a decade, but I still consider my favorite show. So I know that I probably don't have a lot of BookTube SFF people watching me, since I mostly review Jewish mainstream and literary fiction. But just in case there's some sci-fi loving people, I thought I'd show you my corkboard behind me, or well, behind the camera actually. So this is my sad little corkboard. I had the idea starting last year that I'd want to populate it with memorabilia from conventions that I go to, but I don't actually go to a lot of conventions, so that's part of the problem. And so I got these last year at San Diego Comic-Con, which is going on now, but as you can see, I'm not there, sadly. But so this is the picture of Chiana that I got last year at Comic-Con. It's actually a signed picture from the actress Gigi Edgley. You probably can't read it because she wrote with a dark pen on a dark picture, but she wrote, "To Rachel, love aliens and spaceships," and there's her signature down by the bust of Chiana's costume. I was so thrilled. I was telling my friend it was like my teenage self was geeking out. I was watching Farscape when it aired when I was a late teen and in my very early 20s, and Chiana was my favorite character, and I think it's because she was the most teen character on the show. We were quite different as far as personality went. Chiana was a party girl. She was often getting into a lot of trouble, and meanwhile I was spending my Friday nights watching Farscape on the couch. But I loved her character. She was difficult and challenging. She definitely fit into a dystopian sort of mold because her people were very follow the mold, be brainwashed, no deviation from the norm, and she was very much the "oh hell no, I'm running away" character. So in a way I feel like she has a place now in some YA fiction, that she might have been a precursor to some of that popularity. But here she is. Did have one other thing to say that I almost forgot about. It's about this book, A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. I talked about it last week as well, by Becky Chambers. It's a science fiction novel about humans and aliens on a spaceship going on adventures. That's a sort of generic way to put it. And a lot of people compare it to Firefly, which is a much more popular show about space travel and human beings in the future that aired around the same time as Farscape did, and people compare it to Firefly because of that. But actually Becky Chambers wrote a blog post for Barnes & Noble about why she was thinking of Farscape, so it, you know, really tickled me. So I'll leave a link to that down below. For all of you who haven't watched Farscape but like this book, maybe you should check it out. This is particularly for Curtis, from Curtis Books and Films. I am officially no longer holding up the works anymore. Yesterday I got this Holden at the library, and I trekked out into the DC swamp humidity and picked up the book from the closest branch that I could get it from, and that I sent it to for the hold. And I got home and I felt sweaty and gross for the rest of the day because of my trekking out into that weather. But it's here, and I'm definitely willing and able now to start our buddy read. I'm very excited. I did finish one book last week. This is American Innovations Short Stories by Rivka Galchen. It was what won my Try a Short Story tag that I did at the beginning of the month. I'll link to that video down below. I was pretty surprised by this collection. The description made it sound rather surreal, magical realist, but I still found it accessible. Sometimes, like with literary fiction that's about magical realism, the the language can kind of jump away from the plot, and I feel like there's not a real story behind it, and it's just a bunch of hoity-toityness. But this one, she stayed close to the stories, and I could follow them, and they were still intriguing to me. For the most part, I didn't love all of them, but I liked a lot of them a lot. I feel like a common theme in all of them was the complexity of relationships, and that even though sometimes there were thrills, like in my favorite short story, there was time travel involved, I was still very much drawn mostly to the idea of how difficult it is to form relationships. So I thought I'd read from a few sections, jumping back and forth, just about the stuff that stuck out to me as exploring these themes of forging awkward relationships. And this is from the story The Region of Unlikeness, which is about time travel in a subtle way. Everyone I knew seemed to find my new companions arrogant and pathetic, but whatever they called me, I ran to join them. Elan and Jacob were both at least 20 years older than me, and they called themselves philosophers, although only Jacob seemed to have an actual academic position. And maybe a tenuous one, I couldn't quite tell. I was happy not to care about these things. Jacob had a wife and a daughter too, though I never met them. It was always just the three of us. We would get together, and Elan would go on about Heidegger and thrownness, or about Will Ferrell, and Jacob would come up with some way to disagree, and I would mostly listen and eat baklava and drink lots of coffee. Then we'd all go out for a long walk, and Elan might have had some argument in defense of, say, fascist architecture, and Jacob would say something about the straighted and the smooth, and then a pretty girl would walk by and they would talk about her outfit for a long time. Jacob and Elan always had something to say, which gave me the mistaken impression that I did too. Elan frequently called me his dusty librarian, and one day he called me his inner Swabian. This struck him as very funny, and even Jacob didn't seem to understand why. Elan made a lot of jokes that I didn't understand, but he had that handsome face and pants fit him just so, and he liked to lecture Jacob about how smart I was after I'd, say, nervously folded up my napkin in a way he found charming. I got absolutely no work done while I was friends with those guys, and hardly any reading either. What I mean to say is, those were the happiest days of my entire life. Then we fell apart. I just stopped hearing from them. Elan didn't return my calls. I waited and waited, but I was remarkably poised about the whole thing. I assumed that Elan had simply found a replacement mascot, and that Jacob, in love with Elan in his way, hardly registered the swapping out of one girl for another. Suddenly, it seemed a mystery to me that I had ever wanted to spend time with them. Elan was just a charming parrot, and Jacob the parrot's parrot. And if Jacob was married and had a child, wasn't it time for him to grow up and spend his days like a responsible adult? That, anyway, was the disorganized crowd of my thoughts. Several months passed, and I almost convinced myself that I was glad to be alone again. The next book I want to talk about is Nine Folds Makes a Paper Swan by Ruth Gilligan. This was on my to-read list anyway, because I tend to find and quickly add to my to-read list any contemporary Jewish fiction that's out there, and this one was particularly intriguing because it was about Irish Jews, and so that's an unusual subject for contemporary Jewish fiction. And then I got to it sooner than I would have. I usually put titles on my list as they come out and get to them a year or so later. But this one I decided to pick up now because Eric from The Lonesome Reader started a book club with his friend Anna, and they picked some of their favorite books that are out there, and this one was on it. And I was so excited because I love the sound of most of the books that Eric reviews on his channel. I just really love his channel and his taste. And I was just so excited because this one was already on my list, and apparently he really liked it. And I started it, and it definitely is very literary. The prose is not straightforward, then this happened, and then that happened, and then this happened. She definitely has a style that is more thoughtful, and that you have to work at what the characters are thinking about. She doesn't lead you by the hand, and I've only read the first 3 chapters, which are the beginnings of the 3 stories that weave through this collection. And I also went ahead and I listened to another review of this book on BookTube by Insert Literary Pun Here, and he really has wonderful insights. I mean, I really, out of all the Bailey's reviews that I listened to during the Bailey's Prize, I think I remember hers the best. She's a wonderful reader. But, and I'm sure she's going to influence me as I go along with this, but yeah, and everyone should check out her review. maybe I'm talking myself out of having to do my own, but no, I'm gonna do my own review of this too. And I'll take a quick note to talk about what I'm listening to on audiobook right now. It's The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern, and I'm a little disappointed by this. I thought I'd like the book a little better than I do. I'm interested enough, I like the atmosphere of it, but I thought I'd connect more to the characters than I do, but still enjoying it, but not as much as I thought I would. And finally, I'm continuing to chug along on my Flannery O'Connor short stories that I'm attempting to read throughout the month. I have once again fallen behind due to my birthday festivities, and I have not completely gotten back on the wagon again. I really liked the last story that I read. It was a long one, about 50 pages, called The Displaced Person. It was written in 1954, and it involved a displaced family from Poland after World War II and the Holocaust. Not Jewish characters, and not referenced to as the Holocaust, which fits the time period well, I think. It really took until the 70s, I believe, for Jews to really open up, Jewish survivors to open up about the nature of the Holocaust and how they were specifically targeted. I mean, there were other targets, and this story does deal with a Catholic family that was in a displaced persons camp. But none of the characters really want to focus on that, and I don't have much impetus to focus on that. This is a very dark story, and I think it challenges what I claim as my like of unlikable characters, because these people are all jerkwads. We're following a bunch of Southern Protestants, and we have the matron of a farm who's trying to keep her farm hands in order, and they're making a lot of excuses for not having empathy for displaced people, like, oh, that's just their problems over in Europe, and then they're foisting them on us, and blah, blah, blah. And of course there's a lot of lack of empathy for her African-American field hands and all of the requisite racism of lumping them all in the, oh, all of them are so lazy and so stupid. And whenever people whine about PC culture and wanting to go back to the good old days, I'm tending to think lately of Flannery O'Connor stories. Because these characters, they're awful. And it's fascinating because it does go into class animosity, because this woman is bitching about her white trash workers and her African-American workers, and now this displaced person, and then we also follow some of the white trash workers who are feeling animosity towards the displaced person worker and also the African-American workers, because it's all a big hoopla about stereotypes and about who gets the biggest scrap in the scrap heap, basically. And so it's a fascinating look at how society uses these sort of hatreds to pit people against each other, really. Whew. And I think I'm going to stop there, because I very well might have run out of battery. So I might just be talking to myself now, but I hope I'm not. So signing off for now. Thanks so much for listening if you still are. Happy reading. I'll see you next time.